They say we all live two lives, the one we broadcast to the world in high definition, and the one we keep hidden behind a locked screen. Welcome to Midnight Fatal Cases. I'm your narrator. Tonight, we delve into a case that blurred the lines between a digital performance and a physical tragedy. This is the story of Julian Vane and Elena Brooks, a couple who became the internet's golden standard for love, only to become its most haunting cautionary tale. In the world of social media, the drafts folder is a graveyard for the moments we aren't ready to show. But for Julian Vane, those unposted videos became something far more sinister, a digital diary of a descent. It was the content he never intended for us to see that eventually spoke the truth he tried so hard to edit out. Turn down the lights and let's look behind the filter. This is the case of the TikToker whose own drafts solved a murder. Chapter 1. The Hook. The blue light of a smartphone screen has a way of washing out the human face, turning skin into a pale, ghostly mask and draining the warmth from the eyes. In the quiet, suffocating hours of a Tuesday morning in late October, that light was the only thing illuminating the bedroom of Julian Vane. To his 3 million followers, Julian was a beacon of charisma, a 19-year-old with a crooked smile, perfectly tousled hair, and a talent for making every viewer feel like they were his closest friend. His videos were a rhythmic montage of high-energy music, expensive streetwear, and a lifestyle that seemed curated for envy. But in the silence of that room, the rhythm had stopped. There was no upbeat soundtrack. There was only the sound of heavy, jagged breathing and the rhythmic tapping of a thumb against glass. Julian wasn't recording a new trend. He wasn't replying to fans. He was staring at his drafts folder. In the world of social media, the drafts folder is a purgatory for the things we aren't quite ready to show the world. It is a digital graveyard of failed jokes, bad lighting, and moments of vulnerability that didn't fit the brand. For Julian, however, the drafts had become something far more sinister. They were a fragmented diary of a descent. Among the 64 unposted videos were snippets of a reality that his audience never saw, a reality where the smile vanished the moment the timer stopped, and where the air between him and his girlfriend, Elena Brooks, had become thick with a tension that felt like a physical weight. Elena, the golden girl of his channel, the girl whose laughter provided the harmony to his digital melody, was gone. And as the world began to ask questions, the answers were already encoded in the very app that made him a star. We often talk about the digital footprint as a trail of where we've been, but for Julian Vane, it was a roadmap of a breakdown. The police didn't find the truth in the polished, edited videos that garnered millions of likes. They found it in the raw, shaky footage that was never meant for public consumption. They found it in the metadata, the timestamps, and the subtle shifts in the background of his room. They found it in the way his eyes darted to the corner of the frame when he thought the camera was off. The tragedy of Elena Brooks wasn't just a story of a relationship gone wrong. It was a terrifying exploration of how the pressure to remain perfect online can fracture a human soul until it snaps. The initial report was mundane, almost routine for a city like Seattle, where people often drift in and out of the fog. A young woman, 18 years old, failed to show up for her shift at a local boutique. Her parents hadn't heard from her in 24 hours. In any other circumstance, it might have been a case of a teenager seeking space. Но Елена не была просто какой-нибудь подростком. She was half of the internet's favorite couple. Within hours, the digital machinery of the true crime community began to whir. Speculation turned into a frenzy. Fans analyzed Julian's latest posts for clues, looking for a shadow in the background or a heaviness in his voice. They looked everywhere, except the one place the truth was hiding. Inside the phone Julian held in his trembling hands as he sat in the dark, scrolling through the drafts of a life that had already ended. The horror of this case lies in the performance. For 3 days after Elena disappeared, Julian Vane continued to post. He played the role of the worried boyfriend, the grieving partner, the confused victim of circumstance. He used the tools of his trade, the lighting, the slow-motion effects, the somber acoustic covers, to weaponize the public's empathy. He was a director of his own innocence. But every time he hit record, he was competing with the version of himself that existed in the drafts. The version that was angry, the version that was desperate, the version that knew exactly where Elena was. This is not just a story about a murder. It is a story about the terrifying ease with which a digital persona can swallow a human being whole, leaving nothing behind but a trail of pixels and a cold, calculated lie. As the investigation deepened, the investigators began to realize that the digital world and the physical world were overlapping in ways they had never seen before. The crime scene wasn't just the apartment they shared, it was the cloud servers where Julian's digital history was stored. Every like, every share, and every deleted comment was a piece of a psychological puzzle. But it was the unposted content, the raw, ugly, unedited moments, that finally pulled back the curtain. The drafts weren't just videos, they were confessions waiting to be decoded. And as we peel back the layers of Julian Vane's carefully constructed life, we find a story that is as much about the darkness of the human heart as it is about the glow of the screen. Chapter 2: Context and People. To understand the tragedy of Elena Brooks, one must first understand the architecture of the digital world she inhabited. It was a world built on the illusion of intimacy, where the distance between a stranger's thumb and a creator's heart is measured in millimeters of glass. Julian Vane was not a monster when he started. At 16, he was merely a boy with a cheap smartphone and an insatiable desire to be seen. Born and raised in a quiet, unremarkable suburb of Portland before moving to the sleek, rain-slicked streets of Seattle, Julian had always felt like a secondary character in his own life. He was the kid who was moderately talented at drama, moderately good at track, but never the lead, never the star. That changed when he discovered the algorithm. He realized that with the right filter, the right music, and a precisely timed transition, he could edit his mediocre reality into something cinematic. He didn't just want to live his life, he wanted to broadcast it. Elena Brooks entered Julian's life during his senior year of high school. If Julian was the flickering artificial light of a neon sign, Elena was the steady, warm glow of a hearth. She was an aspiring photographer with a genuine eye for beauty, the kind that exists in the mundane. She captured the way rain pooled on a rusted mailbox or the specific shade of gold that hits a kitchen table at 4 in the afternoon. She was grounded, empathetic, and possessed a quiet confidence that Julian lacked. When they started dating, her friends described them as a balancing act. She gave him a sense of reality, and he gave her a sense of adventure. But as Julian's social media presence began to explode, the balance began to shift. The relationship was no longer a private sanctuary, it was a collaborative project. By the time Julian reached 2 million followers, the name Julian and Elena had become a brand. To the public, they were the embodiment of relationship goals. Their content was a seamless stream of morning coffee routines, weekend getaways to the Olympic Peninsula, and coordinated outfits that looked effortless, but were actually the result of hours of planning. Julian's followers didn't just like his videos, they felt invested in his happiness. This is the danger of the parasocial relationship. The audience begins to feel a sense of ownership over the creator's life. And Julian, ever the perfectionist, felt an increasing pressure to provide them with the perfection they demanded. He began to view his daily life through a lens of capturability. If a moment wasn't recorded, did it even happen? If Elena wasn't smiling in a way that looked good on a high-definition screen, was the relationship even working? Subtle warning signs began to emerge, hidden in plain sight behind the vibrant colors of their TikTok feed. Elena's family, particularly her mother Sarah Brooks, noticed that Elena had stopped talking about her own photography. Her camera, once an extension of her arm, began to gather dust on the shelf. She was too busy being the subject of Julian's lens to focus on her own. In later interviews, friends recalled how Julian would become visibly agitated if Elena wanted to go out for dinner without getting camera ready. A simple meal wasn't just a meal, it was a potential vlog moment. The spontaneity that had once defined their romance was replaced by a rigid script. Julian became the director and Elena was his lead actress. But unlike a professional actress, Elena didn't have a trailer to retreat to when the cameras stopped rolling. She was living on a set that never closed. The psychological toll on Julian was equally profound, though far less sympathetic. He had become addicted to the dopamine hit of the notification bell. His self-worth was tethered to the fluctuating numbers of his analytics page. If a video underperformed, he didn't look for a creative reason. He looked for someone to blame. More often than not, that person was Elena. He began to criticize her appearance, her tone of voice, and her perceived lack of enthusiasm for the business. He grew paranoid that her growing weariness would be visible to the fans, that they would see the cracks in the porcelain and turn away. To Julian, a drop in engagement wasn't just a financial threat, it was an existential one. He was terrified of returning to the unremarkable boy he had been in Portland. He would do anything to keep the spotlight on, even if it meant burning the person closest to him to keep the fire going. In the months leading up to the disappearance, the atmosphere in their shared downtown Seattle apartment became toxic. The space, which appeared so airy and modern in videos, was actually a claustrophobic maze of ring lights, tripods, and charging cables. Elena began to spend more time in the spare bedroom, which she tried to keep off-limits for filming, a small island of privacy in a sea of public exposure. Julian viewed this as an act of rebellion. He saw her need for boundaries as a betrayal of their shared success. There are accounts from neighbors who heard muffled arguments through the walls, not about infidelity or money, but about the brand. Julian's voice would rise, sharp and frantic, accusing Elena of being ungrateful for the life he had built for them. Elena's voice was usually lower, a steady drone of exhaustion, pleading for a single day where the phone stayed off. The drafts folder on Julian's phone started to fill up during this period. These weren't the happy-go-lucky clips the world saw. They were the outtakes of a crumbling psyche. In one video, found much later by digital forensics, Julian is seen setting up a camera for a surprise gift video. The moment Elena walks into the room, he beams, his face transforming into a mask of pure joy. But the moment Elena says she's too tired to do a reaction, the mask drops. The transition is chilling. His face goes cold, his eyes narrow, and he mutters a string of insults that would make his fans' blood run cold. He doesn't stop the recording immediately. He stares into the lens for a few seconds, breathing heavily, as if he's daring the camera to judge him. Then he saves it to drafts. He couldn't post it, but he couldn't delete it either. It was as if he wanted to preserve the evidence of his own mounting rage. Elena, meanwhile, was reaching her breaking point. She had started reaching out to old friends from high school, people who knew her before she became Julian's Elena. She spoke about wanting to move back to Portland, about wanting to enroll in a traditional darkroom photography course, about wanting to feel real again. She was planning an exit, but in the world of high-stakes social media, an exit isn't just a breakup, it's a PR disaster. Julian knew this. He knew that if Elena left, the Julian and Elena brand would die. He wouldn't just lose his girlfriend, he would lose his status, his income, and the carefully constructed identity that protected him from his own insignificance. The stage was set for a confrontation that the algorithm couldn't predict, and the audience would never see coming. The tragedy was that the very tools used to celebrate their love were being repurposed to document its violent end, one unposted frame at a time. Chapter 3. Escalation. The gray skies of a Seattle November seemed to press down on the glass walls of their high-rise apartment, turning the luxury space into a gilded cage. To the outside world, Julian Vane and Elena Brooks were living the dream. But inside those walls, the atmosphere had turned radioactive. The transition from affection to obsession is rarely a sudden leap. It is a series of small, incremental shifts that normalize the unthinkable. In the 3 weeks leading up to Elena's disappearance, Julian's digital habits shifted from vanity to total surveillance. He wasn't just checking his own views anymore. He was monitoring Elena's every digital move. Every like she gave to a post, every new follower she gained, every DM she received, Julian viewed it all through the lens of a suspicious accountant. He had installed tracking software on her devices under the guise of security, telling her that as a public figure, she needed protection. In reality, he was building a digital fence around her, ensuring that every time she stepped outside the apartment, he could see her as a blinking blue dot on his screen. The drafts folder on Julian's TikTok account became a dark mirror of this mounting control. Forensic analysts would later discover dozens of videos Julian recorded during their most private, agonizing arguments. He would hide his phone behind a stack of books, a coffee mug, or a designer sneaker box, hitting record to capture Elena at her most vulnerable. In these clips, Julian is heard speaking in a low, measured, almost robotic voice, the voice of someone trying to gaslight their partner into believing they are the lost one. "You're ruining everything we worked for, Elena," he would say, while the camera captured her sitting on the edge of the bed, head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Do you want to go back to being a nobody? Do you want to go back to that shithole in Portland?" He wasn't just arguing, he was documenting her instability, creating a cache of evidence he could use to discredit her if she ever tried to leave. The disturbing nature of these drafts lay in their cold, calculated repetition. He would record the same argument multiple times, almost as if he were rehearsing his own reactions. In one particularly harrowing clip found in the deep archives of his cloud storage, Julian is seen standing in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing a sad face. He watches his own reflection with a clinical detachment, adjusting the tilt of his head and the specific moisture in his eyes, trying to find the exact expression that would garner the most sympathy from a hypothetical audience. Then, he pivots the camera to the closed bathroom door, where the muffled, gut-wrenching sound of Elena crying can be heard. He doesn't go to comfort her. He doesn't show a flicker of empathy. He just watches the red recording light on his phone, a small, satisfied smirk playing on his lips before he cuts the video and saves it to the drafts. He was a man who had stopped seeing his girlfriend as a person and began seeing her as a prop in a tragedy he was already writing. This escalation wasn't confined to the apartment. It started to bleed into the public eye, though the fans were too enchanted by the filter to see the rot. During a live stream in mid-November, Julian was answering fan questions, while Elena sat in the background, ostensibly reading a book. A fan asked about their upcoming anniversary plans. Julian launched into a grand scripted monologue about a surprise trip he had planned to a private villa in Mexico. Elena, caught off guard and clearly hearing this for the first time, looked up and said, "Julian, we talked about this. I need to visit my parents that weekend. My dad's surgery is on the Friday." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian didn't get angry on camera. Instead, he gave a soft, chilling laugh that didn't reach his eyes and looked directly into the lens. "Elena's just being silly, guys. She loves surprises. She's just playing hard to get for the vlog." But those who watched closely noticed his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. The comments section, usually a place of mindless adoration, began to flicker with genuine concern. "Is Elena okay? She looks scared. Look at Julian's eyes." Julian spent the next 4 hours after the stream ended deleting those comments and blocking every user who expressed even a hint of suspicion. By the final week of November, the tension had reached a terminal velocity. Elena had secretly secured a small studio apartment in Portland and had begun packing her things into boxes hidden in the back of her closet behind the rows of expensive clothes Julian had bought her for content. She knew she couldn't just leave. She had to escape. She had written a physical letter to her parents, a piece of paper she mailed from a post office 3 blocks away, so Julian couldn't track the metadata of an email or a text. In that letter, she told them she was scared. She told them that the boy they liked, the boy with the crooked smile, was a character Julian played for the camera. The real Julian, she wrote, was someone who didn't exist when the phone was off. She described him as a hollow man who was eating her alive to fill his own void. Julian discovered the hidden boxes on the afternoon of November 26th. We know the exact timing because he recorded a draft immediately after the discovery. The video is 10 seconds long and is perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence in the entire case. It shows Julian's face, extremely close to the lens, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of the screen. The background is pitch black. He doesn't say a single word. He just breathes, a heavy, rhythmic, predatory sound that mimics the ticking of a clock. It is the sound of a man who has finally moved past anger and into a cold, focused state of intent. In the background of the audio, the faint sound of the front door unlocking can be heard. Elena's voice, tired but trying to sound normal, calls out, "Julian? I'm home. I got the groceries." The video cuts off the moment she enters the frame. It is the last draft recorded before the missing person narrative began, and it serves as the digital preamble to a nightmare. The psychological buildup was no longer a slow burn. It was an inferno. Julian began to view Elena as a damaged asset, a part of his brand that was malfunctioning and needed to be removed before it could cause further damage to his reputation. He had spent years curating an image of a perfect, enviable life, and he was pathologically incapable of allowing that image to be tarnished by a messy public breakup where he would be cast as the villain. To Julian, Elena's desire for a life of her own was a glitch in his programming. He began to research missing person statistics, how to hide a body in water, and cellular pings in a private browser, all while simultaneously posting a Throwback Thursday photo of them laughing on a beach in Malibu captioned, "Forever is a long time, but I want to spend every second of it with you. Soulmates, as goals." The horrifying reality uncovered by investigators was that while he was planning her end, he was also planning the content that would follow. He was pre-calculating the engagement he would get from a tragedy. He was looking at the metrics of other influencers who had experienced loss and studying how their follower counts spiked during their periods of mourning. He was a predator who was also his own publicist, a man who saw his girlfriend's life as a secondary concern to his own arc. The escalation was complete. The boy who wanted to be seen had finally decided that the only way to stay in the light was to plunge the person who loved him most into total, permanent darkness. Digital forensics would later highlight a specific draft from November 25th, 2 days before the murder. In this video, Julian is filming out the window of their 22nd-story apartment. He focuses the camera on the sidewalk below, zooming in until the people look like ants moving through the rain. He narrates in a whisper, his voice devoid of any human warmth. Everything looks so small and replaceable from up here. Problems, people, they just disappear if you look at them from the right angle. You just have to know how to edit them out. He then turns the camera to a framed photo of Elena on his desk. He taps the glass over her face with a rhythmic metallic sound. He's wearing a heavy silver signet ring. The sound is like a hammer hitting an anvil. Tink, tink, tink. It's a rhythmic execution of a memory. The prosecution would later argue that this was the moment of premeditated detachment. Julian had already killed the idea of Elena in his mind. She was no longer a human being. She was a variable in an equation that wasn't balancing. The drafts folder was his laboratory where he tested the limits of his own depravity, documenting his own transformation into a killer, perhaps believing that even the most heinous of acts could eventually be edited, filtered, and sold to an audience hungry for the next viral tragedy. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. The night of November 27th was indistinguishable from any other Seattle autumn evening, cold, damp, and shrouded in a persistent mist that seemed to dissolve the edges of the skyscrapers. Inside the apartment on the 22nd floor, the silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the constant noise of the city below. Julian sat on the designer sofa, his face illuminated by the familiar cold glow of his phone. He had been sitting there for hours, staring at the closed bedroom door where Elena had been packing the final remains of her life into 2 small suitcases. There was no more shouting. The time for arguments had passed, replaced by a heavy, terminal clarity. Elena was leaving at dawn. She had already called an Uber for 5:30 a.m. She had already blocked Julian's primary number. She was moving toward a future where he was nothing more than a bad memory, a chapter she would eventually summarize to a therapist. To Julian, this was an unacceptable ending. In his mind, he was the author of this story, and authors do not let their characters simply walk off the page. The irreversible moment began not with a scream, but with a notification. Julian's tracking software alerted him that Elena had just sent a final location pin to her brother in Portland. It was a digital tether, a safety net. For Julian, this was the final insult, a sign that she viewed him as a threat to be managed rather than a partner to be loved. He stood up, his movements fluid and unnervingly calm, and walked toward the bedroom. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't need one. His weapon was his presence, his size, and the overwhelming, suffocating weight of his obsession. When he opened the door, Elena was standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. She looked small, exhausted, and profoundly relieved to be leaving. She didn't even look at him. She just said, "I'm not talking anymore, Julian. It's over. Just let me sleep until the car gets here." What happened next was a blur of motion that would later be reconstructed by medical examiners with agonizing precision. Julian didn't explode in rage, he imploded. He moved toward her with a speed that gave her no time to react. The struggle was brief but violent, a desperate collision of a woman fighting for her freedom and a man fighting for his ego. There were no witnesses, no neighbors who heard the sounds of the struggle over the hum of the building's climate control system. In those few minutes, the Julian and Elena brand ceased to exist, replaced by the grim reality of a crime scene. When the movement finally stopped, the apartment returned to its eerie silence. Julian stood over her, his chest heaving, his hands trembling, not with regret, but with the sudden, crushing realization of what this would do to his brand. His first thought wasn't that he had taken a life. It was how he was going to explain the absence of his co-star. This is where the story takes its most disturbing turn into the digital realm. Within minutes of the act, while Elena lay still on the hardwood floor, Julian picked up his phone. He didn't call 911. He didn't call his parents. He opened TikTok. He went to his drafts folder and created entry number 65. The video, discovered months later by specialized forensic software after Julian thought he had scrubbed it from the cloud, shows him standing in front of the hallway mirror. He is disheveled, his hair matted with sweat, but he is already beginning to work. He looks at his reflection and tries to simulate a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He whispers to the camera, "Something happened. She's gone. I don't know what to do." He records it, watches it, and then deletes the take. He does this 4 more times, adjusting the lighting and the angle, trying to find the version of grief that feels the most authentic. He was literally rehearsing his innocence while the evidence of his guilt was only feet away. The turning point wasn't just the physical act of murder. It was the moment Julian decided to transform that murder into a content strategy. He spent the next 6 hours in a state of hyper-focused productivity. He didn't panic, he curated. He took Elena's phone and sent a series of pre-written texts to her friends, using her voice, her slang, and her emojis, claiming she had decided to take a solo trip to a cabin in the woods to clear her head and would be off the grid for a few days. He then used her phone to post a final, grainy photo of a sunset to her Instagram story, captioned, "Peace at last." He was building a digital ghost, a breadcrumb trail that led away from the apartment and toward a vague, mysterious disappearance. He was using the tools of their shared success to bury her, frame by frame. As the sun began to rise over the sound, Julian began the physical cleanup. He was meticulous, driven by the same perfectionism that made him a successful influencer. He used high-end cleaning supplies he had ordered for a Clean With Me vlog a month prior. He moved her suitcases into his car, making it look like she had packed and left of her own accord. But the most chilling part of his process was his continued use of the drafts folder. He recorded himself waking up to an empty bed. He recorded himself calling her name through the apartment, his voice cracking with a practiced desperation. He was creating a library of raw footage that he could release over the coming weeks to document his journey as the abandoned boyfriend. He believed that if he could control the digital narrative, he could overwrite the physical reality. The emotional weight of this chapter lies in the total absence of humanity in Julian's response. There was no moment of realization where he fell to his knees in horror. There was only the cold, calculating logic of an algorithm. He viewed Elena's death as a problem to be solved through better editing. He was so detached from the reality of his actions that he actually felt like the victim of a situation that was threatening his career. He looked at Elena's body not with sorrow, but with the clinical eye of a director looking at a broken prop that was cluttering the set. He was a man who had spent so long living in a 9/16 vertical world that he no longer understood the permanence of death. To him, everything was a draft. Everything could be reshot. Everything could be fixed in post-production. By 8 a.m. on November 28th, the apartment was spotless. The suitcases were gone. Elena's car was parked 6 blocks away in a high-crime area, the keys left on the seat to encourage a theft that would further muddy the waters. Julian returned to the apartment, showered, dressed in a somber but stylish gray hoodie, and sat down to film his first official update for his followers. He didn't post it immediately. He saved it to the drafts. In the video, he stares into the lens for a long time before speaking. "Hey guys," he says, his voice a perfect husky whisper. "I don't really know how to say this, but Elena, she's not here. I woke up and she was just gone. I'm scared. I just need your prayers right now." He hits save to drafts, and for a brief second his face relaxes into a look of cold, professional satisfaction. The performance had begun, and the world was his audience. However, Julian made one critical mistake, the mistake of a man who believes he is smarter than the technology he uses. He didn't realize that TikTok's drafts folder doesn't just store the video file, it stores a wealth of metadata, including the precise GPS coordinates of where the video was filmed and the exact millisecond it was created. While he was carefully crafting his waking up to an empty bed video, the metadata was screaming the truth, that he was recording grief in an apartment where the woman he was grieving had only just stopped breathing. He was creating the very evidence that would eventually hang him, all because he couldn't resist the urge to document his own deception. The turning point was complete. The boy who wanted to be seen had finally committed the ultimate act, and in his arrogance, he had filmed the prologue to his own downfall. The weight of Elena's absence began to ripple outward. Her brother, who had received the location pin, tried to call her back 10 minutes after receiving it. Julian, holding her phone, let it vibrate on the kitchen counter until it went silent. He didn't turn it off. He knew a sudden power down would look suspicious to investigators. He just watched the screen light up with the word brother, the light reflecting in his eyes as he planned his next post. He was already thinking about the Finding Elena hashtag. He was already thinking about the interviews. He was already thinking about the documentary. He had killed the woman he loved, and now he was going to use her memory to become the most famous version of himself yet. The horror was no longer in the act itself, but in the monstrous digital afterlife Julian was constructing for them both. Chapter 5: Fallout and Discovery. The disappearance of Elena Brooks became the internet's primary obsession within 48 hours. Julian Vane did not simply report her missing, he curated a tragedy. He launched the hashtag #FindElena campaign with the precision of a product rollout. Every few hours, he would post a new update, sometimes a shaky, tear-filled video from the driver's seat of his car, claiming he was out searching the parks where she liked to take photos. Other times, a somber montage of their happiest moments set to a slowed-down, melancholy pop song. His follower count didn't just grow, it doubled. People who had never heard of the couple were suddenly glued to their screens, refreshing Julian's profile for the latest clue. He was the protagonist of a real-time thriller, and he played the part with terrifying commitment. He even organized a candlelight vigil in a downtown Seattle park, standing in the center of a circle of grieving strangers, his face a mask of noble suffering, while dozens of smartphones recorded his every sob. But while the digital world was captivated by Julian's performance, the physical world was beginning to close in. The lead investigator, Detective Marcus Thorne, was a veteran of the Seattle Police Department who had seen enough grieving families to recognize when a performance was too polished. Thorne didn't spend his time watching Julian's TikToks for emotional impact. He watched them for technical discrepancies. He noticed that in several videos where Julian claimed to be out searching at 3 a.m., the reflection in his eyes showed a specific pattern of lights that didn't match the street lamps of the parks he named. It looked more like the high-end LED ring light Julian used for his studio setups. Thorne also noted the lack of physiological signs of true grief. There was no swelling of the nasal passages, no genuine redness in the eyes, only the superficial wetness that could be achieved with eye drops or a bit of glycerin. The first major crack in Julian's narrative came from Elena's brother, Leo Brooks. He presented Detective Thorne with the location pin Elena had sent just minutes before her phone went silent. The pin placed her exactly at the apartment. Julian had told police that Elena left the apartment at 11 p.m. on the 27th after a minor disagreement about dinner. But the digital evidence told a different story. If she had sent a pin at 1:14 a.m. from inside the apartment, then Julian's timeline was a lie. When confronted with this during a formal interview at the precinct, Julian didn't flinch. He leaned into the camera, as he always did, and said, "She must have sent that to him to make me look bad." We were arguing. She was being manipulative. She wanted to hurt me because I told her I needed space. It was a classic pivot, shifting the blame onto the victim, but it gave Thorne the probable cause he needed to secure a full forensic warrant for Julian's digital life. When the Cyber Crimes Unit gained access to Julian's TikTok account and his associated cloud storage, they found what they later described as a digital charnel house. They bypassed the public-facing videos and went straight for the deleted files and the drafts folder. What they found was a chronological map of a murder. There were 68 unposted videos in the days surrounding the disappearance. The most damning were the practice takes. Julian had recorded himself practicing the discovery of Elena's missing suitcases. He had recorded himself finding a strand of her hair on the pillow and breaking down into tears over and over again until the performance felt right. In take 1, he was too angry. In take 2, he was too stoic. By take 6, he had found the perfect balance of vulnerability and strength. These videos were time-stamped before he had even officially reported her missing to the police. But the smoking gun was the metadata embedded in draft number 65, the video Julian had recorded in the hallway mirror just minutes after the struggle. While Julian had tried to scrub the video itself, the app's background sync had already uploaded the metadata to the cloud. It showed the precise GPS coordinates of the apartment and a timestamp that placed Julian in the hallway at the exact moment he claimed to be out driving around the city in a frantic search. Furthermore, the audio analysis of the silent draft revealed a faint, rhythmic sound in the background, the sound of a high-end air purifier in the apartment running on its max setting, a detail that contradicted his claim that he was in the middle of the street when the realization hit him. He wasn't just lying, he was documenting his lies in real time. As the digital evidence solidified, the physical evidence followed. Using the GPS data from Julian's searching videos, investigators noticed a pattern. While he claimed to be visiting public parks, his car's built-in navigation system showed a 4-hour gap on the morning of November 28th. The car had traveled to a remote, densely forested area near the Snoqualmie River, far from the well-lit paths of the city. A search team, equipped with the specific coordinates pulled from Julian's phone's frequent locations history, was dispatched to the site. There, under a layer of damp earth and pine needles, they found Elena. She was still wearing the clothes she had chosen for her escape to Portland, a simple denim jacket and the silver locket her mother had given her for graduation. She was no longer a brand or a prop. She was a young woman whose life had been snuffed out because she dared to want a reality that didn't involve a camera. The arrest of Julian Vane was, fittingly, almost cinematic. The police arrived at his apartment on the evening of December 4th. When they entered, they didn't find a man in mourning. They found Julian in the middle of a set. He had rearranged his living room to create a memorial corner, with candles, photos of Elena, and a tripod positioned perfectly to capture his reaction to the news that a body had been found. He was literally waiting for the notification so he could film his grief in real time. When Detective Thorne walked into the frame and read him his rights, Julian's first reaction wasn't to ask about Elena. He looked at the camera, which was still recording, and then at Thorne. "You're ruining the shot," he muttered. It was the only honest thing he had said in weeks. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. The same community that had supported Julian turned on him with a ferocity that only the internet can manifest. The hashtag #FindElena was replaced by hashtag #JusticeForElena. Fans who had sent him money and messages of support felt a personal sense of betrayal. They began to dissect every old video, finding clues in the way he looked at her or the way he spoke to her, things they had ignored when they were part of his audience. The Julian and Elena brand became a case study in the toxicity of influencer culture. But beneath the digital noise, the reality remained. A family was shattered, a young woman was dead, and her killer was a man who was so obsessed with his own image that he had filmed his own descent into madness. The discovery phase of the trial revealed even more chilling details. Julian had been using a secondary burn account to monitor the true crime threads discussing the case. He had been leaking false information to popular creators to steer the suspicion away from himself and toward Elena's mysterious past in Portland. He was playing a game of digital chess with the investigators, unaware that they were already looking at his drafts. The prosecutor, a sharp-witted woman named Elena Vance, coincidentally sharing the victim's first name, argued that Julian was a new breed of predator, one who didn't just kill for power or passion, but for content. She presented the drafts folder as a digital diary of a sociopath, a curated record of a man who viewed the ending of a human life as just another trend to be exploited. As the details of the drafts were made public, the world was forced to confront a terrifying question. How many of the perfect lives we see online are built on a foundation of similar unposted horrors? Julian Vane wasn't an outlier. He was the extreme logical conclusion of a culture that rewards performance over authenticity. He had lived his life for the like, and in the end, it was his desire to be liked for his grief that provided the rope for his own hanging. The investigation ended not with a grand confession, but with a silent scroll through a folder of videos that were never meant to be seen. A gallery of ghosts that finally spoke the truth Julian had tried so hard to edit out. Chapter 6. The Ending. The trial of Julian Vane did not feel like a typical courtroom proceeding. It felt like a premiere. The gallery was packed not just with journalists and grieving family members, but with internet sleuths and former fans who had traveled across the country to see the man behind the ring light. But as the drafts folder was systematically played for the jury, the spectacle began to curdling into something much darker. There is a specific kind of horror in watching a man rehearse his own grief. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom, the videos looked different. Without the music, without the fast-paced editing, they were merely the pathetic recordings of a boy trying to find a version of himself that looked innocent. The jury didn't see a star, they saw a void. They saw the 64th take of a breakdown, where Julian stopped mid-sob to check if his hair was still falling perfectly over his forehead. The silence in the courtroom after each video ended was heavier than any shout could ever be. It was the sound of a million digital illusions shattering at once. The most haunting moment of the trial came when the prosecution played the final recovered draft, video number 69. It was recorded in the back of a police cruiser just after Julian had been handcuffed, but before he was taken to the station. He had somehow managed to keep his phone hidden in his waistband during the initial struggle of the arrest. The video is mostly black, the camera pressed against his thigh, but the audio is crystal clear. You can hear the muffled sounds of the police officers talking outside the car, the squawk of the radio, and the distant sirens. And then you hear Julian. He isn't crying. He isn't praying. He is whispering to himself, This is going to be the biggest video yet. The numbers are going to be insane. I just need to get the lighting right for the statement. If I can just get to a mirror. Even at the precipice of total ruin, Julian Vane was still thinking about his reach. He was a man who had become so entangled in his own algorithm that he could no longer perceive a reality where he wasn't the center of an audience's attention. He had lost the ability to feel fear or remorse. He only felt the itch of uncaptured content. Julian was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the eyes of the law, the case was closed. But in the digital world, the story refuses to die. His TikTok profile remains a digital ghost town frozen in time. The last public video, the one where he asks for prayers while Elena's body was already hidden in the woods, still has millions of views. The comments section is a living archive of human reaction, ranging from early messages of support to later waves of vitriol, and eventually to the cold curiosity of new viewers who stumble upon the murderer's profile through the For You page. This is the lingering discomfort of the case. The algorithm doesn't have a moral compass. It continues to serve Julian's face to unsuspecting teenagers, his crooked smile popping up between dance trends and cooking tutorials, a predatory relic of a life built on a lie. Elena Brooks, meanwhile, has been reclaimed by those who truly knew her. Her family held a private memorial where no phones were allowed, a final act of defiance against the medium that had facilitated her end. They published a book of her photography, filled with the quiet, unedited beauty she saw in the world. The rust on a gate, the shadow of a tree, the way light hits a glass of water. It is the antithesis of Julian's work. Her images are still silent and profoundly real. They remind us that there is a world beyond the lens, a world that doesn't require a filter to be valuable. But even this legacy is haunted by the way she died. Every time someone looks at her photos, they cannot help but look for the shadow of the man who was standing behind her, waiting for the perfect moment to edit her out of existence. The true horror of the Julian Vane case isn't just the murder. It is the realization that Julian wasn't a monster born of a different cloth. He was a product of an environment that prizes the performance of life over the living of it. He was a boy who learned that every emotion, every tragedy, and every private moment is a commodity. When we look at his drafts, we aren't just looking at the evidence of a crime. We are looking at a mirror. We are forced to ask ourselves how much of our own lives are drafts, how many times we have adjusted our own smiles, curated our own sorrows, and edited our own realities until the truth is buried under layers of pixels. Julian Vane just took the logic of the digital age to its most violent, inevitable conclusion. He believed that if he could control the narrative, the facts didn't matter. He believed that the world was just a screen, and he was the only one who mattered because he was the one holding the camera. As you walk through the streets of Seattle today, past the high-rise where it happened, the building looks the same as any other. The 22nd floor still glows at night. But there is a lingering sense of unease that permeates the digital space he once occupied. The drafts folder has become a modern-day cautionary tale, a reminder that our devices are recording more than just what we choose to post. They are recording our intentions, our movements, and the fragments of our souls that we think we've hidden in the dark. The drafts were not just the key to solving a murder. They were a window into a new kind of darkness, a darkness that doesn't hide in the woods, but in the blue light of the palm of your hand. The story ends in a prison cell where Julian Vane is reportedly still trying to document his experience. Without a phone, he has taken to writing scripts on the walls, planning his comeback for a world that has already moved on to the next tragedy. He is a man who is still performing for an audience that isn't there, a director of a film that has long since been canceled. And in the woods of Snoqualmie, the rain continues to fall on the spot where Elena was found, washing away the traces of the digital footprint until only the earth remains. The silence there is absolute, a quiet horror that no microphone can capture and no filter can improve. It is the silence of a life that was real, taken by a man who was anything but. The drafts folder is still out there in a sense. It lives in the servers of a multinational corporation, a collection of ones and zeros that represent the final hours of a young woman and the total collapse of a young man. It is a digital mausoleum that we all contribute to every time we hit record and then hesitate. We are all living in the drafts, waiting for the moment we feel ready to show the world who we are. The tragedy of Julian and Elena is a reminder of what happens when the ready version becomes more important than the person itself. It is a story that lingers not because of its violence, but because of its familiarity. It is the story of the blue light that never turns off, and the eyes that have forgotten how to see in the dark. In the end, Julian Vane's greatest fear wasn't the loss of a human life, it was the loss of his audience. But tonight, the cameras are off, and the performance is finally over. The story of Elena Brooks is a haunting reminder that in an age of curated perfection, the most terrifying truths are often hiding in plain sight, just one click away from the surface. If this deep dive into the digital darkness resonated with you, consider subscribing to Midnight Fatal Cases. We tell the stories that others look away from, one chapter at a time. But before you leave, I want to hear from you. How much of what we see online do you actually believe? Does the pressure of the perfect life create monsters? Or did the technology simply give Julian a stage for a darkness that was already there? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this story. I read every single one. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, not everything meant for the drafts stays hidden forever. I'll see you in the next case.